The alien woman walked slowly through the dusty streets of the human colony. Her thin body trembled with weakness and her hands clutched at her torn cloak. She was a widow, alone and forgotten, carrying only hunger and sorrow in her heart. The war had taken her husband. The bombs had destroyed her home, and now the people of this colony looked at her as if she was a disease. The sun was harsh, burning her cracked skin. Children pointed at her and whispered to each other. Adults pulled their own children away as if her shadow alone could harm them. No one offered her food. No one offered her kindness. She was not only poor but also alien, and in this colony that was enough to make her a target of hate. She passed by a food stall, the smell of warm bread filling her nose. Her stomach twisted painfully, and she stopped, staring at the golden crusts stacked on the counter. The vendor saw her and frowned. "Move along," he said sharply. "We don't serve your kind here." The widow lowered her head, her eyes burning with shame, and forced herself to walk. Away behind her, some boys laughed and threw small stones, one striking her back. She did not turn. She did not cry out. Her heart was too heavy for tears. Step by step, her legs grew weaker. Her vision blurred as hunger and despair fought inside her. She remembered the days when her husband was alive, when he would hold her hand and say, "We will survive, no matter what." But he was gone, and his words had turned into nothing but empty echoes. Now she was truly alone, a stranger among humans who hated her. At last she stumbled near the market's edge, where the crowd grew thinner. Her legs gave way and she fell against a wall. Breathing heavily, her cloak slipped, revealing her alien face, pale blue skin, sharp cheekbones, and tired golden eyes. People walking by stared, some in disgust, some in fear. One man muttered, "Why doesn't she just die already?" Her chest tightened, but she had no strength to respond. She lowered her head, waiting for the darkness to take her. Then a small voice broke through the noise. "Are you hungry?" The widow raised her eyes slowly. Before her stood a little human girl, no older than 7, with wide, curious eyes and a small piece of bread in her hands. The child did not run away. She did not scream. She only looked at the alien woman with something rare, kindness. The girl held out the bread, smiling shyly. "Here, you can have this," she said, her voice gentle. The widow stared at the bread, then at the child, unsure if this was real. Her hands shook as she reached out, touching the soft crust with trembling fingers. She wanted to thank the girl, but her throat felt tight. No human had spoken kindly to her in so long. As she ate slowly and carefully, the girl sat beside her, swinging her legs. "My name is Lila," the girl said proudly. "What's your name?" The widow whispered her alien name, but it was too hard for human tongue. Lila laughed softly. "That's too long, I'll call you Star Lady." For the first time in years, the widow almost smiled. She kept eating, feeling a small warmth in her empty heart. Then Lila leaned closer and said something that made the widow freeze. "You should marry my dad." The girl said simply, "If you marry him, he will give you food every day." The widow blinked in shock, almost dropping the bread. Surely the girl was joking. Humans hated aliens, and no man would ever marry her kind. Yet, Lila's eyes were serious, filled with childlike innocence. "My dad is lonely," she explained. "Since Mama went away, he eats alone every night. He is kind, not like the others. If you come with me, you won't be hungry anymore." The widow shook her head slowly. "No, child, your people don't want me." But Lila grabbed her hand, small and warm, pulling gently. "I want you," the girl insisted, "and Daddy listens to me. Please come." The alien widow looked at the child, her heart torn between fear and hope. This could be a cruel trick, yet something in Lila's smile felt true. For the first time, she felt the shadow of a choice, to stay in the streets and die slowly, or to follow this strange little girl into the unknown. Her stomach growled, her body ached, and her soul longed for warmth. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "What do I have to lose?" When she opened them again, Lila was still holding her hand, waiting patiently. The crowd around them whispered, watching the strange sight of a human child leading an alien widow. But Lila ignored them all, tugging with surprising strength. Come on, Star Lady, the girl said cheerfully. I'll take you home. The widow rose unsteadily to her feet, following the small child step by step. Every gaze burned into her back. Every whisper cut her like a knife. Yet for the first time she was not walking alone. She did not know what waited for her at the girl's home. But deep inside, a fragile spark of hope lit up. Perhaps this strange human child was the key to something more than just survival. Perhaps this was the beginning of a story she never expected. And as the door of destiny slowly opened, the widow thought only one thing. Maybe, just maybe, she was not finished. Yet, the alien widow followed the little girl through the narrow streets, her weak legs trembling. She expected stones, insults, or even soldiers to stop them. Yet no one dared to challenge the girl's bold steps. The child walked proudly, holding her hand as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The widow kept her hood low, hiding her alien features, though whispers chased her from every corner. Lila, the girl, hummed a small tune as if she was taking home a friend, not a stranger. The widow's heart pounded with fear, every step heavier than the last. She had lived too long in hate to believe kindness could be true. And yet, this little girl looked at her with eyes full of trust. It was confusing, frightening, and strangely warming. Soon, they reached a small wooden house at the edge of the colony. It was simple, worn, but alive with the smell of firewood and the faint glow of lanterns inside. The widow froze at the gate. "This is your home?" she whispered, her voice dry. "Yes," Lila smiled, "and soon yours too." The widow's chest tightened at those words, the thought impossible, almost painful. But before she could speak, the door opened. A tall man stood there, his hair dark and his face shadowed with tired lines. He carried strength in his shoulders but sorrow in his eyes. For a moment his gaze fell on the alien woman, and his jaw tightened. The widow braced herself for rejection, ready to be cursed and pushed. Away instead, the man's eyes flickered with something else. Surprise, caution, and maybe compassion. Lila ran to him and hugged his leg. "Daddy," she said brightly. "I brought someone home. She's hungry. She needs us." The man's eyes stayed on the widow, sharp and unreadable. The silence stretched until the widow wanted to turn and flee. Then his voice came deep and calm. "Come inside," he said, "before anyone sees." The widow blinked in shock, unsure if she had heard right. Still trembling, she stepped inside, led by Lila's small hand. The door shut behind her, cutting. Off the world of hate outside, the house was warm, smelling of bread and fire. Her stomach growled loudly, embarrassing her. The man noticed and said quietly, "Sit. I'll bring food." The widow lowered herself into a chair, her cloak clinging to her thin frame. Every nerve in her body screamed to run, yet the warmth of the house held her still. Moments later, the man placed bread and stew before her. The steam rose, carrying scents she had almost forgotten. Her hands shook as she picked up the spoon, tasting the food. It was simple, but to her it felt like a feast from another life. Lila sat opposite, her watching with a proud smile. "See," she said, "I told you Daddy would feed you." The widow's throat tightened, tears threatening her eyes. She could not remember the last time she ate without fear. She whispered a soft, "Thank you," her alien accent making the words rough. The man only nodded, sitting quietly across the table. His eyes never left her, full of questions he did not ask. As the widow ate, she studied him carefully. He was strong, yet not cruel. His hands calloused from work. His face carried sadness, the kind that comes from loss. She wondered if this was the loneliness Lila had spoken of. The girl suddenly broke the silence, her voice innocent yet bold. "Daddy," Lila said, "you should marry her." The widow froze, almost choking on her food. The man's eyes widened, his spoon pausing, in midair. "What?" he asked, his voice steady but surprised. Lila nodded seriously. "She is alone. You are alone. Mama is gone, but you can be happy again. If she marries you, She will never be hungry, and we will be a family. The widow's heart raced, her hands tightening around the bowl. She wanted to speak, to deny, to escape, but no words came. The man leaned back slowly, his gaze fixed on her face. He said nothing at first, only studying her as if weighing the weight of his daughter's words. The widow lowered her eyes, ashamed. She was an alien, unwanted, a burden, not someone who could bring happiness. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low. "You don't understand what you're asking, Lila," he said. "The world is not kind, not to her, not to us if we take her in." But Lila only crossed her arms, stubbornly. "I don't care what the world says," the girl replied. "She is kind, she needs us. And you need her too." The widow felt her chest tighten, a mix of fear and longing. No one had ever spoken for her before. No one had defended her right to exist. Her hands trembled on the table, her heart caught between despair and hope. The room grew heavy with silence again. The man's eyes lingered on her face, then moved to his daughter's hopeful expression. He sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead. "This is not simple," he murmured. "But," he looked at the widow again, "maybe it is not impossible either." The widow's breath caught in her throat. Was he truly considering it? Her heart thudded, not just from hunger, but from something she had not felt in years, the fragile pull of hope. Yet even as that warmth touched her, danger pressed at the edges of her mind. Outside, the colony was watching, and in the shadows beyond their window, enemies waited for any reason to strike. The alien widow sat at the wooden table, her hands trembling as she lifted the spoon. The stew was hot, steam rising into her tired face, filling her nose with the smell of herbs and broth. She ate slowly, as if afraid the food would vanish if she swallowed too quickly. Each bite warmed her chest, chasing away the cold hunger that had lived inside her for too long. Lila watched her with a wide smile, swinging her little legs under the chair. "See," the girl said happily. "I told you Daddy would give you food." The widow lowered her eyes, whispering, "Thank you," though her voice cracked from shame and gratitude. The man said nothing, only sat across from her, his arms crossed, his sharp eyes studying her every move. She could feel his caution like a weight pressing against her skin. He had not rejected her, but he had not welcomed her either. For a long moment the house was quiet. The only sound was the crackle of fire in the hearth and the faint clinking of the spoon against the bowl. The widow forced herself to eat slowly, tasting each bite, because she did not know if she would ever have another meal like this again. Her alien heart ached with both relief and fear. Relief because for the first time in months she was safe under a roof. Fear because she knew kindness could be taken away in a heartbeat. When the bowl was empty, she lowered the spoon and bowed, her head. "You have shown me mercy," she said softly, "but I should not stay. If they find me here, they will punish you." Her words were true, yet her voice shook with longing because she did not want to leave. Lila gasped and shook her head. "No, you can't go. You're Star Lady now. You belong here." The widow's chest tightened at those words. Belonging was something she had not felt in years. The man finally spoke, his voice deep and firm. "My daughter is too young to understand the danger," he said, his gaze steady on the widow. "If the soldiers discover you here, they will call it betrayal. They will take my home, my work, maybe even my child." The widow bowed her head lower, shame burning her heart. "I will not bring harm to you," she whispered. "I will leave before they come." But before she could rise, a loud knock thundered at the door. The sound froze her blood. Her body went stiff, every nerve screaming in terror. The man's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. "Stay where you are," he muttered, moving quickly to the door. Lila grabbed the widow's hand under the table, her little fingers warm and determined. "Don't be afraid," the girl whispered, though her own voice trembled. The knock came, again louder this time, followed by harsh voices. "Open up, colony security. We have reports of an alien in this area." The widow's heart raced, her breath caught in her throat. She tried to rise, but Lila held her hand tighter, refusing to let go. The man opened the door only slightly, blocking the view inside with his broad shoulders. Two soldiers stood there, their eyes sharp, their weapons hanging at their sides. "We're searching for an alien," one said, his tone cold. "Have you seen anyone suspicious?" The man shook his head calmly. "No one here. Only me and my daughter." The soldier's eyes narrowed, trying to peer inside. "Then you won't mind if we look around?" the soldier said, pushing forward. The man stepped in their way. His voice hard. "My daughter is sleeping. You will not wake her for baseless searches." The tension in the air was sharp, like a blade ready to cut. The widow's hands trembled under the table, her mind screaming that she should run, yet her body frozen with fear. After a long silence, the soldiers muttered curses and stepped back. "Keep your eyes open," one warned. "If we find out you're hiding her, there will be consequences." Then they left, their boots crunching on the dirt outside. The man closed the door slowly, his shoulders heavy with the weight of danger. He turned back, his gaze falling on the widow hiding in the shadows of the table. For a long moment no one spoke. Only the crackle of fire filled the silence again. The widow whispered shakily, "You risked everything. Why?" The man did not answer right away. Finally, he sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Because my daughter believes in you," he said quietly, "and I cannot break her heart." Lila grinned proudly, squeezing the widow's hand. "See, Daddy listens to me," she said, her eyes shining. The widow's chest ached with a strange warmth, something she had not felt in years. Hope, fragile but alive. As night fell, the man laid out a small blanket in the corner. "You can stay here. For tonight," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But tomorrow we decide what happens next." The widow nodded slowly, her heart heavy but her stomach warm from the meal. She lay on the blanket, listening to the quiet breaths of the girl sleeping nearby, and for the first time in so long she felt safe enough to close her eyes. But in the silence outside the house, unseen by them, a shadowy figure lingered near the window, eyes watching, lips curling into a cruel smile. The colony was not blind, and soon whispers would grow into danger. The widow's story was only beginning. The night was silent, but the widow could not sleep. She lay on the thin blanket in the corner, her eyes wide open, staring at the wooden beams above. The warmth of the stew still lingered in her stomach, yet her heart twisted with unease. The knock of the soldiers still echoed in her ears, sharp and threatening. Every sound outside the small house made her flinch. Afraid they had returned, and she turned her head and saw little Lila curled up on her bed, hugging a worn toy animal, sleeping peacefully. The sight softened the widow's chest, bringing a strange comfort. The child had brought her here, had fed her, had defended her without fear. But the father was different. He was careful, guarded, always watching. She could not understand him yet. When the fire burned low, the widow rose quietly, her bare feet soft against the wooden floor. She moved slowly, her cloak brushing behind. Her, drawn by a quiet curiosity, the basement door stood half open, a faint draft of cool air slipping through. She hesitated, then stepped down the creaking stairs. The air below was damp and smelled of dust and old memories. In the basement, she found shelves of tools, broken boxes, and a small chest of items. Among them lay faded photographs and medals that caught the weak glow of the lantern she carried. She knelt and touched the nearest photograph, her golden alien eyes narrowing. It showed the man when he was younger, dressed in a soldier's uniform, standing tall beside other men. The mark on his arm was unmistakable. It was the mark of the very battalion that had fought in the war against her people. Her chest tightened, her breath grew shallow. Had this man fought against her husband? Had these very hands brought death to her kind? She picked up a medal, its metal cold, its edges sharp, her mind filled with memories of fire, screams, and her husband's final words. The war had taken everything from her, and now she stood in the house of one who may have been part of it. A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned quickly, hiding the photograph in the shadows of her cloak. The man stood there, his face unreadable, his voice steady. "What?" "Are you doing down here?" The widow froze, unsure how to answer. She wanted to accuse him, to demand the truth, but fear held her tongue. Instead, she whispered, "I could not sleep." The man stepped closer, his eyes moving to the chest, then back to her. His gaze hardened, for a moment, then softened with something else. "I fought in the war," he said quietly without her asking. The words struck her like a blade. Her knees trembled, and her heart screamed in silence. But then his next words came, heavy with sorrow. "I did not want to fight, I had no choice. They called us defenders, but all I saw was killing." The widow stared at him, confusion mixing with pain. Could this man truly regret what he had done? Or was this only another trick, another mask humans use to hide their cruelty? Her voice cracked as she whispered, "My husband. He never came back from that war." The man's eyes lowered, guilt shadowing his face. "I am sorry," he murmured. "More sorry than I can ever say." The basement felt colder, the silence heavier. For the first time, she saw not just caution in his eyes, but also grief. It mirrored her own, a pain carried in silence. They were both scarred by the same war, though on different sides. Neither spoke for a long moment, the weight of the past pressing between them. Then, a small voice broke the silence. "Daddy?" Lila stood at the top of the stairs, rubbing her eyes, her toy animal in her arms. "Why are you both awake?" she asked sleepily. The man forced a small smile. "Go back to bed, Lila. We'll be up soon." But the girl shook her head and stepped down, her eyes moving between the widow and her father. "You were talking about the war," she said softly. "I hear it in your voices." The widow lowered her eyes, ashamed. The girl walked closer and placed her tiny hand on the widow's trembling fingers. "You don't need to be afraid," Lila whispered. "Daddy won't hurt you, he's not like the others." The man's gaze softened at his daughter's words. For a moment, the heavy air in the basement lifted, replaced by something fragile and new. A quiet bridge forming where, once there had only been walls. But just as the widow felt her heart ease, a loud crash shattered the calm. Glass broke upstairs, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps outside. The man's face hardened instantly, his hand reaching for a tool from the shelf. The widow's eyes widened, her chest tightening with dread. Someone was breaking in, someone had followed them. The danger she had feared was finally at their door. The window upstairs shattered into sharp pieces. The man rushed up with a hammer in hand, his jaw tight, his steps heavy. The widow followed quickly, her heart racing, while Lila clung to her cloak. When they reached the main room, the night air blew cold through the broken glass. Shadows moved outside, vanishing into the dark. The man stepped forward and checked the door, but it was still locked. "They're watching us," he muttered. "Someone knows you're here." The widow's chest tightened, guilt heavy in her throat. "This is because of me," she whispered. "I should never have come," but the man shook his head firmly. "No," he said. "They would have done this even without you. Fear and hate need little reason." His eyes burned with anger, but not at her. At the world outside that wanted to hurt what little peace they had. For the rest of the night, he stayed awake near the fire with the hammer in his hands. The widow sat nearby, her golden eyes watching the flames dance. Lila fell asleep between them, her small head resting on the widow's lap. For the first time, the widow touched the girl's hair gently, brushing it aside. The child stirred but did not wake, her trust deep and innocent. The man noticed, and for a moment, his sharp gaze softened. He saw not a stranger, not an enemy, but someone his daughter had chosen. Days passed, and the widow remained in the house. The man worked in the colony fields, bringing home food each evening. The widow helped quietly, cooking simple meals, cleaning the small rooms, repairing torn clothes with careful hands. At first, the man only watched her, testing her. But slowly, he began to accept her presence. One night, when he returned tired and muddy, he found the house already warm with stew. She handed him a bowl without a word, and he ate it silently, but his eyes carried gratitude. Lila clapped her hands happily. "See? You're like a family now." The neighbors, however, were not blind. Whispers grew outside the walls, angry stares followed them when they went to the market. Some spat on the ground when the widow walked by. Others muttered curses. The man stood tall, shielding her with his body, ignoring their hate. But the widow felt the weight of every whisper, every glare. Her heart told her she was a burden, even as her soul longed to stay. One evening, as the three of them sat together, Lila asked the widow to sing. "Star Lady, sing me one of your songs," she begged, her eyes wide. The widow hesitated. Her alien songs were strange to human ears, full of sharp tones and deep echoes, but Lila insisted, tugging at her cloak. So the widow began, her voice soft, trembling at first, then stronger. The melody filled the house, strange yet beautiful, like the sound of stars breaking through silence. Lila leaned against her, eyes half closed in wonder. The man listened too, his eyes steady on the widow. When the song ended, the house was quiet, warm, and full of something unspoken. That night, when Lila slept, the man spoke. "You've changed this house," he said quietly. "My daughter laughs again. I had forgotten what that sounded like." The widow's heart trembled at his words. She wanted to answer, to say he had given her something too. Safety, warmth, and hope, but her throat closed and she only bowed her head. The silence between them was heavy but gentle, like the pause between breaths, but the outside world was not gentle. One afternoon, when the widow walked with Lila to fetch water, a group of men blocked their path. They sneered, their voices sharp and cruel. "Monster," one spat. "Stealing food." From humans hiding behind a child, another stepped closer, reaching for her arm. Lila screamed, clutching the widow tightly. Before the men could touch her, the father arrived, his fists tight, his eyes burning. He stood between them and the widow, his voice like thunder. "She is under my roof," he growled. "If you want to harm her, you'll have to go through me." The men laughed, but none dared step forward. They muttered curses and walked away, their eyes promising trouble. The widow's hands shook as she held Lila. The man turned to her, his voice low but fierce. "You are not alone anymore, not while I live." Her heart ached at his words, a strange warmth filling the cracks of her fear. That night, as they sat together in silence, the widow looked at him differently, not just as a man but as someone who carried both strength and sorrow, someone who chose to protect rather than hate. And in her chest, something fragile began to grow, something she had thought long dead: trust. But outside, in the shadows beyond the broken window, the same figure returned. He whispered into a small comm device, his voice cold. "They are together. Just as I said. Tomorrow we strike." The night was heavy with silence. The widow sat near the fire, her golden eyes watching the flames flicker. The man worked quietly by the window, repairing the frame from the last break. Lila slept on her bed, her small chest rising and falling with calm breaths. The house felt fragile, like a shell waiting for the next wave to crash. Outside, the shadows moved unseen. The figure who had been watching returned, this time not alone. Whispers carried through the dark, boots pressed into the dirt, weapons glinted under the moon. The attack was coming, swift and merciless. The first sound was the smash of glass. A stone flew through the window, shattering against the wall. Lila awoke with a scream, clutching her toy animal. The man grabbed his hammer, his face hard. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice sharp and calm. The widow pulled Lila into her arms, shielding her with her body, her heart pounding like a drum. The door burst open, wood splintering under a heavy kick. 5 men stormed inside, their eyes full of hate. "Monster," one spat, pointing at the widow. "This ends tonight." The man stood firm, hammer in hand, blocking their way. "She is under my roof," he growled. "You will not touch her." The intruders laughed, circling. "She's a curse." Another shouted, "She brings danger to us all." The widow trembled, but when she saw their hands reach for Lila, something deep inside her awoke. Her alien blood burned, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. She rose, placing Lila gently behind her, and spread her hands. "Stay back," she warned. Her voice low but her power rising, one of the men lunged forward with a blade. The widow moved faster than they expected. A surge of blue energy burst from her palms, knocking the attacker across the room. He crashed into the wall, groaning in pain. The others froze for a moment, stunned, but then their anger grew fiercer. "She's dangerous," they shouted, rushing in together. The man swung his hammer, striking one in the chest, sending him stumbling. Another grabbed his arm, but he twisted free, landing a heavy punch. The widow fought beside him, her energy flashing, pushing back. Attackers for the first time, human and alien, stood together defending the same home. Lila hid under the table, tears streaming down her cheeks, whispering, "Please, please don't let them win." The fight raged, the small house shaking with the struggle. One attacker grabbed the widow's cloak, pulling her down. She struck back with a desperate burst of light, the man screaming as he fell. Another raised his weapon toward her, but the father stepped in front, taking the blow on his arm. He gritted his teeth, blood seeping through his sleeve. Yet he did not fall. With fury, he smashed his hammer into the attacker's shoulder, knocking him to the ground. At last, only one intruder remained, the leader, the same shadowy figure who had been watching. He stepped forward, calm and cold, his eyes burning with hate. "You should have died in the streets, alien," he hissed. "Now you will die here, and the man who protected you will die with you." The widow's chest heaved, her body shaking from the power she had used. The man stood beside her, his arm bleeding, his hammer ready. Together they faced the leader side by side, but before the fight could finish, flames rose outside. Through the broken window, the glow of fire spread across the colony streets. The neighbors had gathered, torches in hand, their voices shouting, "Burn the house! Burn the monster out!" The leader's cruel smile widened. "You see?" he said. "It's not just us. It's everyone. They will never accept you." The widow's heart sank. The firelight flickered across Lila's terrified face. The man clenched his jaw, his voice steady. "Then we fight not for their acceptance," he said. "We fight for our family." The widow looked at him, her chest tightening, her fear colliding with something stronger. "Hope!" The mob outside roared, the flames growing brighter. Inside, the widow and the man stood ready, their bond tested in the fire of hate. Lila crawled out from under the table, clutching both their hands, her small voice trembling but brave. "Don't let them take us," she whispered. "We are family now." The door shook as the crowd outside slammed against it. The house groaned under the growing fire. Smoke began to creep in, choking the air. The widow's golden eyes blazed brighter, her power rising. Again the man lifted his hammer, blood dripping from his arm, his jaw set with iron will, and the child between them held on, refusing to let go. The battle was not over. It was only beginning. The fire outside grew hotter, smoke curling through the broken window. The widow coughed, covering Lila's face with her cloak, shielding her from the choking air. The man stood tall, hammer in hand, his eyes burning with determination. The mob outside shouted with fury, their voices rising like thunder. "Burn the monster! Burn the traitor!" they cried, slamming against the door again and again. The wooden frame groaned, splinters falling to the floor. The widow's heart pounded, her golden eyes glowing in the dark. She turned to the man, her voice low and trembling. "If we stay, they will kill us all." The man shook his head, his jaw tight. "No," he said firmly. "They will not take my daughter. They will not take you either." The widow felt her chest twist with conflict. She wanted to believe him, but the fire outside was real, the hate outside was real. Her mind screamed to run, to escape into the night. Yet when she looked at Lila's small face pressed against her chest, she knew she could not leave them, not anymore. The leader of the intruders, still inside, sneered. "You can fight us, but you cannot fight them all," he spat. "This colony will never let you live. You are doomed." The man raised his hammer, his voice like iron. "Then let them come," he growled. "We will stand together." The widow stepped beside him, her power sparking faintly in her trembling hands. For the first time, she felt no shame in standing tall. The door burst open, flames roaring as the mob pushed forward. The widow unleashed her power, a wave of blue energy forcing the attackers back. The man swung his hammer, striking down anyone who came too close. The small house shook, smoke filling the air, fire licking at the walls. Lila screamed but refused to let go of their hands. Her tiny voice rang out through the chaos. "Stop! She's not a monster, she's my family." The crowd hesitated, their torches flickering in the smoke. Some looked uncertain, others lowered their weapons slightly. The widow's heart raced. The child's words were cutting through their hate, even if only for a moment. The leader snarled, shouting, "Don't listen, she's tricking you, she's dangerous, she will destroy us all." But his voice no longer carried the same power. The people's eyes shifted between the child, the man, and the widow standing together. The man raised his voice, louder than the flames. "You see her power, yes, but you also see her heart. She saved my daughter, she saved me, she has harmed no one here." He pointed his hammer at the leader, his words sharp. "The real danger is hate. The real danger is fear. If we keep burning each other, there will be nothing left but ashes." The widow stood silently, her chest heavy, her hands glowing. Faintly, she expected rejection. She expected another storm of hatred. But instead, a murmur spread through the crowd. Some lowered their torches, others stepped back. The fire in their eyes dimmed, replaced with doubt. The leader saw his control, slipping, his face twisting in rage. "You fools," he shouted. "She will destroy us all." He lunged forward, knife raised, aiming for the widow. But before he could strike, the man stepped in his path, blocking the blow with his wounded arm. With his other hand, he swung the hammer with all his strength. The leader fell to the floor, his weapon clattering away. The crowd gasped, silence falling over the burning night. The widow rushed to the man's side, her hands glowing brighter. She pressed them to his wound, her alien energy sealing the bleeding flesh. The man groaned but stayed on his feet. Her power, once feared, now saved him before the eyes of everyone watching. A hush spread across the mob, the fire crackling the only sound. Lila stepped forward, her voice clear and innocent. "You see," she said, her small hands trembling. "She's not a monster. She's my star lady. She's my family. And if you hurt her, you hurt me too." The people shifted uncomfortably, shame softening some of their hard faces. Slowly, one by one, they lowered their torches. The fire at the edge of the house was stamped out. The shouting faded. The attack was over. The widow fell to her knees, trembling with exhaustion. The man placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it was real. They had faced death and they had survived together, not as strangers but as something more. Days later, the house was rebuilt with the help of a few neighbors who had changed their hearts. The whispers had not disappeared, but they were quieter, less cruel. Some even greeted the widow in silence, a small step toward acceptance. At night she sat with the man and Lila by the fire. The girl leaned against her, smiling. "See, I told you, you just needed a warm meal and a family." The widow's chest ached with emotion, her golden eyes soft. She looked at the man, and in his gaze, she saw not just sorrow but hope. For the first time since the war, she felt whole. Again, not because she was fed, not because she was sheltered, but because she was loved. In a world scarred by hate, a human, a child, and an alien widow had chosen each other. They had chosen family. And in that choice, humanity shone brighter than the fire that once threatened to destroy them all.